The US and Israeli attack on Iran escalated on Monday for the third day, broadening into wider regional violence. In Lebanon, Hezbollah fired rockets and drones into Israel, prompting Israeli strikes on Beirut. Meanwhile, 8 Arab countries have been attacked by Iran, and the conflict has now reached European soil, with the UK saying a drone attack hit its military base in Cyprus. At the White House, US President Donald Trump vowed to continue the attack for as long as it takes.
We're already substantially ahead of our time projections, but whatever the time is, it's okay. Whatever it takes, we will always, and we have right from the beginning, we projected 4 to 5 weeks, but we have capability to go far longer than that.
There is much to talk about. Let's get to our panel. Jamal Abdi is president of the National Iranian American Council. Erin Matei hosts Pushback with Erin Matei on the Grayzone. That's an independent news website. Also with us is political scientist and author Kaveh Afrasiabi. His book is entitled Trump and Iran, From Containment to Confrontation. And Saeed Khan is an associate professor of Near East, Asian and Global Studies at Wayne State University. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. Saeed Khan, the United States and Israeli onslaught on Iran is widening. It now involves most of the Gulf states. As I said, 8 of those Gulf states have been under attack by Iran. Israel and the United States is pounding targets in Iran as well as the capital, Tehran, and hitting Israeli targets as well. In one attack, 9 Israelis were killed, and we know the latest figures, casualty figures on the American side, is 6 U.S. troops have been killed. There are fears that very soon the entire Middle East will be ablaze. Where do you see this heading?
Well, we really don't know, because President Trump hasn't given any kind of coherent plan as far as what the mission objectives are. He has said as recently as today that we will be involved for as long as it takes, but we don't know for what it takes means. We've heard so many different narratives. First, a few months ago, giving support to protesters out of some deluded notion of human rights concern by the United States. Then we heard that it was regime change, which it still may be. The nuclear issue, which was being negotiated actually to a deal even better than the original Iran nuclear deal in 2015. And then more recently, echoing the words of Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel, the concern about ballistic missiles. So we don't see what the situation really bodes for the United States, so that we have some kind of metrics for what a mission accomplished would mean. All we know is it seems as though there is an interest in inflicting as much violence on Iran and the Iranian people as possible.
Jamal Abdi, President Trump is justifying this attack on Iran together with the Israelis, citing national security concerns and fears of what he says was an imminent attack by Iran. But that is disputed, including by Democrats here in the United States. One of those Democrats is Mark Warner. He sits on the Intelligence Committee in Congress. This is what he had to say. Let's listen to him.
The Iranians have been working on increasing their military capabilities. And remember, this was supposed to be military capabilities, at least on the nuclear front, that the president himself said were obliterated based upon the strike of 7 months ago. I saw no intelligence that Iran was on the verge of launching any kind of preemptive strike against the United States of America.
So, Jamal, this raises questions on the legality of this attack on Iran by the United States and Israel. And we've seen no evidence that Iran was about to attack either the United States or Israel.
That's correct. And I don't even know if the administration itself intends for us to believe these justifications. The justification that there was an imminent attack by Iran was then followed up, after it was clearly not true, with a claim that Iran was going to engage in simultaneous strikes. So if the U.S. attacked, Iran was simultaneously going to hit back. That's not a justification for a war. That's not how this is supposed to work. And I think the issue is that this is not a war for U.S. interests. This is a war for Israel and for what Netanyahu believes Israel's interests are. And Israel, we've heard Pete Hegseth lay out a new rationale, which is that Iran was building a conventional umbrella to protect its nuclear program, which really amounts to the U.S. saying Iran can't have any methods of defense whatsoever, can't have missiles, can't have any way to protect itself. That also is not the basis for going to war, and that's why we and many others have said that this is illegal, that Congress needs to immediately vote and pull back from this building disaster.
Kaveh Afrasiabi, cities and towns across Iran have been bombed by Israel and by the United States. In one of those attacks, a girls' school was hit. More than 100 schoolgirls were killed in that. Israel has also bombed multiple hospitals in Iran as well. If we look at the combined power of the United States and Israel, it's a lot more than the Iranians have. So, question is, how long can Iran sustain this?
Yeah, well, the funny thing is that they wrap this illegal invasion under the rubric of humanitarian intervention without even bothering to express any sorrow or remorse about the death of 148 plus little girls at that school and so on. Over 550 Iranian civilians have been killed so far. And just as the UN Secretary General indicated the other day at the Security Council, this is an illegal war, represents a breach of international peace and security, and has been condemned by all the responsible members of the international community, except those who have a vested interest in sowing global anarchy for their own interests. But what is really surprising about this asymmetrical warfare so far is the speed with which Iran has retaliated by striking at numerous U.S. assets in the region, and the failure of the U.S. and Israeli air defense to prevent the Iranian missiles, particularly the hypersonic missiles, to penetrate through their defense and hit their targets in Israel. And we have seen the reaction of, far-right Israeli politician Ben-Gvir pleading with the international community to stop Iran from attacking them. So this war, in my opinion, is going rather badly for the invaders, and their stated intentions should be cast aside. It's a mere rationalization because there's no imminent threat from Iran, and the real intention is to pulverize Iran and to turn Iran into another Syria or Libya for the sake of Israel's supremacy and the related U.S. interest to put pressure on China and cause energy insecurity for China, and also against the BRICS, which is an alternative to the U.S.-dominated financial system.
Okay, Aaron Maté, according to the United States Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, the goal of this military attack, which is known as Operation Epic Fury, was to destroy Iran's offensive missiles. I mean, this goal has changed all the time. The goalposts have shifted. I mean, these started out as talks about Iran's nuclear program, then it moved to changing and overthrowing the government in Iran. Now it's about Iranian missiles. Let's listen to some of what Hegseth had to say.
The mission of Operation Epic Fury is laser focused. Destroy Iranian offensive missiles, destroy Iranian missile production, destroy their navy and other security infrastructure, and they will never have nuclear weapons. This is not a so-called regime change war, but the regime sure did change, and the world is better off for it. We hope the Iranian people take advantage of this incredible opportunity. President Trump has been clear, now is your time.
We've lost Aaron Maté for the moment. Saeed Khan, let me put that question to you. Do you believe that at any time in all these negotiations, that the United States was being honest, was being genuine, was acting in good faith about coming to some kind of diplomatic conclusion, or was this always about using violence to mass murder Iranians?
There was nothing preemptive about this. This was a premeditated war, and it was one that was forged in the crucible of many years, certainly in the imagination and the aspirations of Prime Minister Netanyahu, who's been beating the drums now for 20 years, claiming that Iran was close to a nuclear weapon status. We saw a similar strategy last summer when it came to negotiations, and then, of course, we had the bombing of Iran by Israel and the United States then. I'm afraid that this is a modus operandi that the United States now seems to employ under the Trump administration, not just in the case of so-called diplomacy when it comes to military action, but we've also seen this as the strategy when it comes to the administration dealing with everything, including tariffs and trade agreements. There is nothing honest about how this administration then conducts itself on the world stage. And I would imagine that both allies and adversaries alike are probably going to be skeptical moving forward about whether the United States can be trusted in any way, shape, or form.
Aaron, great to have you back with us. We were listening there to Pete Hegseth talk about some of the reasons and why the United States and Israel have mounted this attack on Iran. But I mean, did you believe at any stage that these negotiations that were taking place in good faith, that they would at some point reach some kind of agreement, there would be a diplomatic solution, or was this just a time issue which just gave the United States and Israel time to launch these attacks?
There was no reason to believe that the U.S. was acting in good faith, especially after how they acted last June when there were talks going on with Iran that were successful, and the U.S. and Israel used that as a ruse to launch a bombing attack on Iran. And this is an administration that, recall, tore up the Iran nuclear deal in Trump's first term, despite certifying, as the Trump State Department did multiple times, that Iran was complying fully with the JCPOA. So based on that experience, there was no reason to expect anything differently this time. I guess what's different is just the level of cynicism and lies at every single stage. So during these talks, the Trump administration was claiming publicly that Iran has to address its ballistic missiles, its support for its allies, what it calls its proxies, and its nuclear program. Yet privately, and we know this from the foreign minister of Iran and from Iranian officials that I spoke to, that Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner agreed to just focus on the nuclear aspect. And that's why, after the first session that was held in Geneva on Thursday, they announced that there was going to be more talks on two different tracks this week, which suggested, as the Yemeni foreign minister said, that there was good progress being made. But that was a lie, because meanwhile, while claiming that they were willing to just talk about nuclear issues, Trump and Israel had been preparing for months to go to war because Iran insisted, as a previous speaker noted, on the right to defend itself, on having a missile program that can defend itself from an Israeli attack. And by the way, if you read the Pentagon's multiple assessments of Iran's military doctrine, it says very clearly Iran's military doctrine is defensive, designed to put an end to hostilities and reach a diplomatic solution. That's what Iran was trying to do here. And once again, Israel and the U.S. exploited that to wage a regime change war.
So, Aaron, what does this tell us about any future talks that will take place between the United States and Iran? I mean, are the Iranians going to come back to the table and trust anything the United States says?
No, they can't at this point, because they know that if there is a ceasefire now, the U.S. and Israel will just use that to plan their next regime change attempt. So unfortunately, if there's any talk of if there's any chance of diplomacy between Iran and the U.S. and Israel in the future, that will be after a catastrophic regime change operation that kills many more Iranians and people in the region. And it has to be underscored, all this could be avoided. The reason why Iran is being targeted is not because of its domestic record. It's not because of a concern for human rights among the U.S. and Israeli administrations, especially after more than 2 years of genocide in Gaza. It's because Iran is a deterrent to U.S. hegemony and Israeli hegemony, and because Israel insists on its self-professed right to steal as much Palestinian land as it wants. And as the Israel ambassador said recently, Mike Huckabee, Israel also, in his opinion, has the right to steal the land of any Middle Eastern country that it wants. And because Iran is the main bulwark against that Greater Israel project, that's why, in the eyes of the U.S. and Israel, it has to be destroyed. Even though, this has to be stressed, Iran has previously accepted the global consensus for how to resolve the source of all West Asia strife, which is granting Palestinians the right to self-determination and accepting a two-state solution. Iran has accepted that as recently as 2017. Just recently, the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said in Doha that the root problem here is Israel's occupation.
Right.
That suggested that Iran was still open to that global consensus of a two-state solution, which Israel and the U.S. reject because they insist on Israel stealing as much land as it wants and denying Palestinians their freedom.
Jamal Abdi, I want to get your view on this complete breakdown of trust. And this is what the Iranian foreign minister had to say about the negotiations that took place. He was speaking on the U.S. network ABC, and let's listen to him.
We negotiated with the United States twice in the past 12 months, and in both cases, they attacked us in the middle of negotiation. And that has become a very bitter experience for us.
So, Jamal, are negotiations now off the table? Hi, Jamal, can you hear me? Oh, no, we lost Jamal. Okay, let me go to Kaveh Afrasiabi. Kaveh, we heard Pete Hegseth say a moment ago that this is also an opportunity for Iranians to rise up and overthrow their government. Is there any chance of that happening?
I doubt that. And, the Israeli media reported that U.S. and Israel decided on this attack at Mr. Netanyahu's late December visit to the White House. So, we're dealing with a great deal of diplomatic subterfuge, just like 8 months ago, in order to pave the road to this calamitous war. I really think that there is a perception problem. This is politically problematic. We have a congressional investigation of the War Powers Act and its relevance to this in a few days from now on. And the administration is changing its rhetoric, is coming down from the regime change approach to a more focused, decapitating Iran's military and so on and so forth. And even that doesn't wash because there's a fundamental illegality of this that can't be spinned away. And I hope that the members of Congress would act responsibly and impose serious restrictions on this unlawful war that is wreaking havoc, not just in Iran, but in the entire region. Unfortunately, some of the Democrats are towing the administration's line on this for all the known reasons, so I'm not very optimistic about that. However, the international community has a responsibility to stand up to this very appalling, you have the death, the assassination of a head of a state who was also the spiritual leader for millions of Shiite Muslims outside of Iran. And we have seen the angry reaction of large crowds in Karachi, Baghdad, in Kashmir, and so on. And that has to be condemned forcefully by all the responsible members of the international community.
Right. Jamal, I'm glad that you are back with us. We were talking about the complete breakdown in trust, the complete breakdown in any kind of lines of communication between the United States and Iran, which the Iranian foreign minister says was because on 2 occasions now, in the midst of negotiations, when there appeared to be some chance that there would be an agreement, the United States and Israel attacked. So does this take negotiations now off the table?
I don't think negotiations can ever be taken off the table. I mean, we've either got war or diplomacy. Those are the tools of statecraft. That being said, this is a debate that was very lively inside of Iran for many years. And the Iranians came to the table for the JCPOA. That got torn up by Donald Trump, then successive negotiations and these 2 surprise attacks. I think really what we are looking at is, from the Iranian perspective, a sense that the United States had become desensitized to the notion of a full-blown war with Iran. And Trump's predecessors tried to avoid these scenarios and treated it as a deterrent. We've seen more recently with the exchange of missiles over the past couple of years between Israel and Iran, then the 12-day war and the U.S. going in. I think there's been this gradual move towards accepting military action as a realistic option. And so I think what the Iranians are looking at is the need to restore some level of deterrence and leverage before they'd be willing to go back to the negotiating table. I just don't think that they are willing now to go back into talks when, first of all, the terms that the Trump administration have set out are untenable for the Iranians. And two, every time they talk, they seem to get bombed. And so they need to deter against that. I would not discount, though, that diplomacy was a foregone conclusion of being a loser under this administration. I think that does not give Benjamin Netanyahu nearly enough credit. Every time that there has been potentially a diplomatic breakthrough, Netanyahu has booked chartered a flight to D.C. to make sure to intervene, and shortly after we've seen military action. So I actually think with Donald Trump, sort of everything is on the table. He's making it up as he goes along.
Yeah.
But unlike Bibi, the Iranians actually never talked to him face to face, and so he is really only hearing from one side of the equation and is doing basically everything that Netanyahu had hoped and dreamed he would do.
Saeed, kind of looking at the broader implications and impact of this attack, as we reported earlier on, at least 8 Gulf states, and these are allies of the United States, and many of these countries also host U.S. military bases. They've been attacked by Iran. Airports have been hit in some of these states. These are some of the busiest airports in the world. People are in lockdown right now. How does that change the whole power balance in the Gulf region?
I think many of these Gulf states are going to have to do some soul searching about whether they, in fact, entered into a Faustian deal with the United States. They have been very loyal in being arms purchasers in very large quantities and have been very gracious to host the United States, as you said, when it comes to military bases. Qatar with Central Command, with an Air Force base there, Bahrain servicing the U.S. Fifth Fleet, the UAE also providing logistical support over there. And now asking the question, was it really worth it? I thought what was noteworthy in Secretary Hegset's remarks today is he didn't even acknowledge the pain and the suffering that these countries are facing as most likely collateral damage for their complicity with the United States. I think it bears, of course, also an acknowledgement that some of the damage to the Gulf states were not targets. The primary targets by the Iranians are the American sites, but knocking down some of the missiles has caused debris to rain down on places like Manama, places like Doha, Abu Dhabi, and Dubai. But for the standpoint of seeing the cost-benefit analysis and the risk and the return on investment for being this closely allied with the United States is going to be something that these Gulf states are really going to have to consider moving forward whenever this thing is completed.
Aaron, President Trump said that the U.S. and Israeli assault could go on for another 4 or 5 weeks. He also said the biggest wave of attacks is yet to come. It's not taken place yet. And both he and the Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, have not ruled out a possible land invasion. I mean, if Trump had thought that this was going to be a very quick one-and-done operation, how big a miscalculation was that?
Well, unlike previous U.S. targets, Iran has a significant capacity to defend itself, and we're seeing that now. And for Trump to muse about a possible ground invasion, he's contradicting everything he ran on. He was, of course, billing himself as the president of peace, and he appealed to people in multiple elections by claiming he was against foreign interventions like in Iraq. And now he's turning around and doing something just as catastrophic. Vice President J.D. Vance, who painted himself as a skeptic of foreign interventions as well, he was promising that we're not going to get into a long, drawn-out war. And there's been talk coming from them that, we're not going to send in combat troops, but they're seeing already, because Iran can respond, that if they want to go ahead with their regime change operation, that they will have to send in troops. And it's an absolute disaster. And it all could have been avoided. There were so many reasonable diplomatic off-ramps, starting with the JCPOA that Trump tore up, and ever since then. So we're looking at, unfathomably, possibly even a worse disaster than the invasion of Iraq.
Right, and Aaron, talking about a worse disaster, if this does indeed go on for another 4 or 5 weeks, I mean, how great is the risk that it could embroil the entire region in a huge conflagration?
Well, the region already is embroiled. We've seen Lebanon now face attacks from Israel after Hezbollah, which is a top ally of Iran, get involved, and people have been killed there. Of course, Israel is now employing in Iran the same doctrine that it employed in Gaza and Lebanon, which is bombing civilian targets. We talked earlier about the girls' school that was hit. Residential buildings in Tehran were attacked today. And when Trump and Netanyahu threaten something even worse to come, that's what we're looking at, is a concerted campaign to destroy Iranian society, to leave the country completely decimated in advance of this regime change campaign. So whether this takes even a few days or a few weeks or months, we are speaking about an absolute disaster.
Kaveh, I've only got a minute, unfortunately, because this is a question that requires a lot more time, and that is the economic impact that this conflict is going to have, not just on the region, but on the global economy.
Well, in our book, Trump and Iran, we did a study that if Iran carries out its threat of blocking the Strait of Hormuz, it would have the deleterious effect on the growth of world economy, as well as certain inflationary impact. And we're beginning to see that with reports of increasing gas prices at the pumps and so forth. And we're only 3 days into this war. So you can only imagine what the situation will look like a week or 2 weeks from now, when the largest Saudi oil refinery, as well as those of Kuwait and so on, are still shut down, and there's a serious disruption in global oil supply. In that case, Trump would be seriously in trouble, and his chances at upcoming election would be in jeopardy.
Okay, and that is where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington.